Hello. Today's topic is about being fearless. But before I get started, I want to just take the time to thank you for visiting my channel. If you feel like you've gained some knowledge or benefited in any way, please like and subscribe so you can support the channel. And remember, tap that notifications bell so you'll be notified when I post new content. You know, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, there was a lot of fear-mongering going on. That is basically one of the core principles or core features, I should say, of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. The main items that were used to create fear were something called sign of the times. Many of you remember seeing a lot of the pictures of devastation and that were presented in the literature, such as, you know, the fiery hailstones and people dying in the streets and people running away from devastation. And as children, many of us viewed these pictures of horror, of death and destruction. So these thoughts of fear were really ingrained in us as children. So these are powerful images of sadness and fear. I know that many of you have recounted stories of nightmares based on some of the pictures that we were exposed to in those days. And this has been going on for a long time. I mean, just think about it. The Jehovah's Witness organization has been speaking of these things for nearly 145 years. Think about that. 145 years of speaking about destruction, devastation, and Armageddon, and whatever terminology they use. There's different terminology. I know Jehovah's Witnesses, we use words like Armageddon, but in many religions they use other terminology like Judgment Day and Purgatory and Apocalypse. There's going to be an apocalypse and you're going to go to hell and there's all this destruction. It's just, it doesn't matter what word is being used. It's just a piece of language which actually all points to the same thing. It's all pointing to creating fear. You know, proclaiming that the end of the world is near and so on. So all of these fearful thoughts were ingrained in us growing up through the years, especially if you continued in that religion. You constantly were reminded, you better be careful or else, you know, you could lose your life at Armageddon and so on. But you know, all of that fear-mongering, it would come to an end if people would just examine human history. That's all you'd have to do. Let's take a quick look. Food shortages. That was one of the key principles. Food shortages in one place after another. Well, there have been food shortages for many, many centuries in various places around the world. In the 1300s, there was the Great Famine. In the 1700s, there was the Great Bengal Famine. Almost 10 million people lost their lives. Then there was the Irish Potato Famine. Many of you may have heard in the 1800s, 1845 to 1852. There was a great Chinese famine, and more than roughly 15 million people died. In the 1980s, which we're more familiar with, this is something that has happened more recently, 1980s and 90s, many of you may recall the efforts to help many people in the Horn of Africa, in the Sudan, and Somalia and Ethiopia, with the hunger that was going, and the famine rather, that was going on there. So I'm just saying, there are all these instances of these food shortages in different places around the world. You may not have been directly impacted, but most of you are aware of these things having occurred. Now let's talk about another one, pestilence, which is another word for disease. Well, we're very familiar with that, aren't we? Considering what happened in the last 3 years or so. But let's talk about that for a second. The biggest one of all was something called the Black Death. That occurred in the 1300s. And another name for it really is the bubonic plague. And that killed a huge number of people, roughly somewhere between 75 to 200 million people. And during those years, in the 1300s, the world population was very small compared to what it is now. And then, of course, and that was considered actually a pandemic, by the way, because it affected Europe, Asia, and Africa. So that was pretty much worldwide. Also, many of you may have heard about smallpox. Smallpox was another big one, and took many centuries to actually, that was one of the first diseases that was actually eradicated. And it was actually due to vaccination mostly. But over 50 million people died from smallpox. And then, of course, there's only about roughly 100 years before now, there was the flu pandemic, which is why I guess nowadays we do have a flu vaccine that many people hear about every year. And it stemmed from this flu pandemic that took place roughly in 1918 to 1920, 21. So roughly 100 years ago. And about 50 million people died. Then, of course, we have HIV, AIDS. Okay, at its peak, 35 million people or so died. And as of today, roughly 42 million people died. And then, of course, we have COVID, right? That was only, that was in 2020. And up until this point, roughly 7 million people died or so. And considering that we have 8 billion, officially 8 billion people on this planet, that's actually a very small number. But the point is, in keeping things in context, all of these diseases have been happening for centuries. And there were many more before our recorded history that we are totally unaware of, because record keeping only happened relatively recently in the last millennium. So this is real evidence that these things that the Bible, that they say the Bible speaks of, food shortages and pestilence and wars, and that's another one. Wars have been happening for thousands of years. All of these things have been going on, you see. And yet, isn't it interesting that after all of that, the Earth is still spinning in its orbit, undisturbed, and fully thriving? That's right. The Earth is thriving. You see, all of the beings on this planet are thriving. And they are thriving because the Earth is thriving. All of the trees, all of the flowers, all of the insects, all of the animals, all of the human beings are still alive and thriving on this planet. Yes, there's pockets of disturbances here and there, as mentioned, famines and these things. But the Earth is still here. The world is still here. The Earth is still functioning. And we are still able to go out, and we know that when we plant seeds, that we will get food. There's no doubt, there's no question, ever. The sun shines every day. Doesn't care. The sun is always out. I mean, in different parts of the world at different times, but the sun is always there. The moon is always there. So, for those of you who are devoted to fear, I have one thing to say to you. You'll be disappointed to know that there ain't no Armageddon coming. No, there's a quote that says, "Never let fear decide your future." Never let fear decide your future. Because that's what your society wants. Doesn't matter which society. You could be the Watchtower Society too. That's right. Because if you live your life in fear, the bottom line is that's how they control you. And that is what leads to a life of unhappiness. So, most of us has lived through and exposed to all types of atrocities. We've heard about it, we read about it. Unfortunately, the media keeps pounding it into our brains every day they get a chance, every moment, about all the terrible things that are happening here and there, down the street. This is happening. But your brain doesn't understand that whatever it's receiving is not happening to you. But because you're hearing about it, your imagination is making it feel like it's real, like it's right in front of you. It's right in front of you. You're watching the TV or your phone or whatever, wherever you get your media. You see? So you're getting this exposure constantly. But remember that there are millions of people around the world that are thriving no matter what is going on around them. And so can you. You can also thrive if you choose to. So it's time that we all wake up. And that's why I'm here doing these videos. I want to show you how one can move from fear to fearlessness, because that's when your life will totally open up. Once you see that fear no longer serves you. With that, I want to leave you with a quote from Marie Curie. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so we may fear less. As always, thank you for watching. Have a beautiful day. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel. And remember, tap that notification bell so you'll be notified when I post new content.